ago, in a country far away, it was Christmas Eve. Snow fell gently as homes and shops were hung with holiday decorations, and as families and friends took gifts to one another and exchanged cheerful greetings, everyone thought how merry a Christmas this will be. To the home of Dr. Stolbaum, guests came from far and near for a Christmas Eve party. Clara and Fritz, the doctor's children, watched with mounting excitement as their aunts and uncles, their grandparents, and their young cousins arrived. Early in the evening, the elders gathered in the drawing room. Under the watchful eyes of the carved owl sitting atop the grandfather clock, they trimmed a beautiful Christmas tree and arranged presents beneath it. In the hallway outside the drawing room, Clara and Fritz and their young cousins peeped through the keyhole of the big doors to try to see what was going on inside. Suddenly the doors were thrown open, and the children dashed into the room. The tree with its glowing candles and shining toys was so beautiful that they could only stand and stare with wonder. Children gathered excitedly around the tree as the elders gave them their presents. There were dolls and doll houses, a rocking horse, toy drums and tin soldiers, all kinds of things to keep them happy for a very long time to come. Fritz proudly displayed a grand soldier's uniform, and Clara held before her a pair of dancing slippers and thought of herself gliding through the air. As soon as she had put on her slippers, Clara began a pretty dance to show how happy she was. She felt like one of the snowflakes dancing against the window pane. When Clara had finished her dance, the clock struck 9. The doors opened, and Uncle Drosselmeyer entered the room. His footman stood stiffly in the doorway. Uncle Drosselmeyer was Clara's godfather, but the black patch over his eye gave him a sinister air indeed, and even Clara was frightened of him. Uncle Drosselmeyer summoned his footman, who entered with a mysterious package in each arm. The children remembered Uncle Drosselmeyer's marvelous gifts of the years before and wondered what these would be. One package looked like a huge cabbage head, the other like a giant cake. After they had been placed before him, Uncle Drosselmeyer lifted the cake and the cabbage head high in the air. Beneath the cake stood an almost life-sized doll, which bowed to Clara. And from under the cabbage head, a large toy soldier stepped forward to salute Fritz. Then Uncle Drosselmeyer wound up the doll and the soldier and sent them off across the floor in an amusing mechanical dance. When the dancing dolls had run down, Uncle Drosselmeyer put Clara on his knee, and from his cape drew a large wooden doll in the shape and costume of a soldier. The children watched with bursting curiosity as Uncle Drosselmeyer placed a nut in the soldier's open mouth. And then Uncle Drosselmeyer lifted the arm that held the sword. The wooden jaws of the soldier bit hard on the nut, cracking it cleanly in two. The soldier was a nutcracker. Clara and her friends laughed in delight. But Fritz was jealous of Uncle Drosselmeyer's gift to Clara. Seizing the nutcracker, he forced a very large nut into its mouth and tried to crack it with all his might. But the wooden jaws cracked instead. Fritz threw the injured nutcracker down with scorn and marched away. Sorrowfully, Clara picked up the poor nutcracker and placed him in a doll's bed at the foot of the tree. Then she carefully bandaged the cracked jaw and sang him a gentle song. Soon it was time for the guests to depart and for the children to go to bed. As she left the room, Clara turned to say good night to her beloved nutcracker. Clara could not sleep. She kept thinking of the nutcracker with his injured jaw. And when all was quiet in the house, she crept back to the drawing room to make sure he was all right. A strange light glowed around the nutcracker's bed. Just as she bent over to look at him, the clock struck midnight. The wings of the owl seemed to flap slowly, casting shadows that looked like Uncle Drosselmeyer's cape blowing in the wind. Clara was frightened. Suddenly, a troop of mice scampered out of the dark corners of the room. They carried long swords and gathered near the door, blocking Clara's escape. The Christmas tree began to grow taller and taller, and the toys and the gingerbread soldiers on its branches came to life and jumped to the floor. The Nutcracker rose from his bed and ordered the gingerbread soldiers to aim a toy cannon at the mice. The room became very still. Then Clara heard the scurrying feet of the mice and the voice of the gingerbread sentry challenging, "Who's there?" There was no answer. The shot of a cannon rang out, and Clara heard mice fleeing from around the tree. She huddled in fright with a doll. A drummer summoned the gingerbread soldiers to form for battle. Across the room, the mouse army prepared to fight. two armies charged each other. The room was filled with the sound of clashing swords and the shots of the cannon. With sad tears in her eyes and growing fear, Clara watched as the mice overwhelmed the gingerbread army. The first battle ended with the defeat of her friend. Nutcracker sounded an alarm to summon his tin soldiers. He would lead them into battle himself this time. As the victorious mice reassembled across the room, the Mouse King appeared to lead them. Clara trembled when she saw that he had many heads and carried an enormous club. Once more the two armies clashed, and once more Clara watched with terror as the mice defeated the Nutcracker's soldiers. Soon, only the Nutcracker and the Mouse King fought in deadly single combat. But the Mouse King was too cunning for the Nutcracker. Under the Mouse King's thrust, the Nutcracker grew weaker and weaker. Just as the Nutcracker seemed to be falling to his enemy, Clara lost her fear. Snatching off her slipper, she threw it at the Mouse King with all her might. The Mouse King fell instantly. Overcome with exhaustion, Clara fainted into a chair. The mouse army, seeing its leader defeated, fled with his body. The Nutcracker stumbled to his feet and bent down to pick up Clara's slipper. As he touched the slipper, the Nutcracker was changed into a handsome prince dressed in dazzling white and gold. As the prince bowed to her, Clara awoke. She could hardly believe that she saw a prince standing before her. The prince thanked her for saving his life and invited her to come with him to the kingdom of sweets. Boldly, the prince raised his arm in a commanding gesture to the walls of the room. Slowly, the walls began to fade away into a beautiful winter landscape. The prince raised his arm again, and the decorations on the Christmas tree melted into snowflakes on its branches. Raising his arm a third time, the prince summoned a boat made from half a walnut to take them to the kingdom of sweets. Slowly And then, with gathering speed, snowflakes began to cascade down from the sky. As they neared the ground, they became beautiful snowflake fairies. One by one, the snowflake fairies circled around Clara in an exquisite waltz with the prince. As the waltz of the snowflakes spun to its climax, the prince swept Clara into his arms and carried her off to the walnut boat to take her to the kingdom of sweets. Candy Castle in the Kingdom of Sweets, the Sugar Plum Fairy and her court prepared to honor Clara with a grand entertainment. When the walnut boat arrived at the castle, the prince presented Clara to the Sugar Plum Fairy and her court. Clara had never seen anything like it. Everything in the castle was made of candy. While Clara gazed in wonder at everything about her, the prince told the court of his adventures as the Nutcracker and how Clara had saved his life. The entire court joined in acclaiming Clara, and the Sugar Plum Fairy invited Clara to sit on the throne and watch the court dancers perform. Clara was told that each dance would represent something good to eat. First, there was a dance for chocolate. In those days, much chocolate came from Spain, so the dancers wore Spanish costumes of a chocolate color. Their movements were quick and fiery, as Clara imagined the dances of Spain to be. Next, a dance for coffee was performed by an Arab couple. Some coffee came from Arabia, and the dance was slow and sultry, like the hot climate there. Clara was delighted when the Arab reached for the cup of coffee offered by his partner on the sole of her foot. As soon as the Arabs had left, two Chinese maidens brought in an enormous teapot and set it down. Out of the top jumped a comical Chinese mandarin. The mandarin did a funny little dance with the maidens, then jumped back into the teapot. Clara knew that this dance represented tea. No sooner had the Chinese disappeared than there jumped into the court dancers dressed in striped trousers like candy canes. Flinging out their legs, stamping and leaping, they performed a Russian folk dance. Faster and faster the folk dance moved, until suddenly it ended in a frenzy of sound and motion. Softly and lightly, four girls danced to the center of the court. They carried reed pipes that looked like shepherds' flutes. But, wondered Clara, what suite did they represent? As the girls played merrily on their pipes, Clara guessed that they were the delicious marzipan candy she loved so much. When the last notes of the reed pipes had faded away, a very tall and stately lady appeared. Out from under her huge skirt pranced children dressed like all kinds of bonbons. After a roly-poly little dance, the bonbons vanished again under the lady's huge skirt. The music of a waltz began to fill the air, and as though the music had suddenly brought them to life, the fairies' attendants left their stations and swept to the center of the court from all sides. Saw that they were costumed as the icing roses of a cake. This was a waltz of the flowers. court was filled with her charming pink figures, circling and whirling through the steps of the waltz as the music soared. The waltz ended. The fairy's attendants cleared the court, making way for the prince and the sugar plum fairy, who danced together as though they had been practicing all their lives just for Clara. Through extraordinary leaps, through graceful glides and floating steps they moved, until the prince caught the sugar plum fairy in his arms and lifted her high in the air. Then the sugar plum fairy was dancing alone. Never had Clara seen such exquisite pirouettes, or such perfect tiny leaps. It was almost as though the sugar plum fairy was dancing on the air. Around and around she spun on the points of her toes. The dance of the sugar plum fairy was the most beautiful dance of all, and it ended much too soon for Clara. The courtiers, the dancers, and the sugar plum fairy's attendants now joined in a grand waltz sweeping across the room. As they passed Clara seated on the throne, they saluted her in final homage. All too soon, it was time for Clara to go home. It was Christmas morning. As the prince and the sugar plum fairy escorted Clara to the walnut boat, Clara thanked them for everything she had seen. She was sure this was the most wonderful Christmas she had ever had. On Christmas morning, when Clara went into the drawing room at home, she saw the Nutcracker lying in his doll's bed under the tree. His jaw was healed, and he seemed to be looking at her. Some exquisite music filled the room, and Clara thought she saw the most beautiful figures dancing through the air above the Nutcracker's bed.